thrilled to introduce all of you to Balaji Srinivasan. He is the former CTO of Coinbase. He was at Coinbase from 2018 to 2019 after Coinbase acquired earn.com, a startup that Balaji founded to allow people to earn crypto. This formed the basis of Coinbase Earn, which most of you know is a wildly successful product for us. One of his first companies was Counsel, which was founded in his Stanford dorm room. It was a genetic testing company that later sold to Myriad Health. He was a general partner at A16Z, and as an angel investor has invested in hundreds of companies. He has a great track record there as well. He was one of the very few people to see crypto's promise from the beginning and was an early investor in Bitcoin and ETH. He is now working on 1729.com, a newsletter that pays readers in crypto for completing tasks. He recently relocated to Asia from the Bay Area, and we'll talk about that as well. Welcome, Balaji. First of all, I just want to tell all of you that for those of you who haven't gotten the pleasure of knowing Balaji, he is one of my dearest friends and one of the most important people in my life. He has taught me so much. And we met first on the Earn deal. I was working.
She wasn't a big fan of Balaji at that time.
No. Well, hey, you're quite a personality, and we had some fights and scuttles over the Earn deal, and like we came through it stronger than ever. I still remember there was this moment where Balaji just froze me out because he was mad at me about some terms I was trying to insist upon. And honestly, I learned a lot from you, Balaji, in that moment. Even though I had been like kind of a lifetime deal person, I realized at that moment that I was pushing for terms that were standard in the market, but they didn't necessarily make sense. And it was funny because you made me question all of that stuff. And I think that's the brilliance of who you are. One other anecdote about that deal that I thought was super interesting, because Balaji was coming in as the CTO of Coinbase, we had to do a bunch of reference checks. And I talked to like 30 different movers and shakers in the Valley. And I remember one of the comments that was made about him, and this was by Mark Andreessen, was there's a lot of really brilliant people in the Valley and in the world. There's very few people who are true originalists. And that's what I think is the beauty of Balaji. His ideas are totally original. And sometimes you'll just react to them and think they're absolutely crazy. And then they grow on you over time and you're like, oh my gosh, like that makes sense now. So anyway, welcome, Balaji. I'm thrilled to do this with you.
Well, you're making me blush, Emily. And, if, what I could say is basically that, we did spend, it was like about a year at Coinbase, but it was an extremely productive year. That was, how like there's some days when you wake up and you work just 16 hours flat and you get a week or even a month of work done in a day, right? We got years and years of work done in that year period. In retrospect, I look back on it, I was like, wow, we were just running full tilt. And you also taught me a lot about basically just how to manage while, it sounds like a cliche to say this, but I didn't fully understand leading via empathy till I, worked with you, and how you combine that with the tough as nails deals attitude. Anyway, there's many things I can say positively, but it's also one of the highlights of my professional career working with you and Brian and so on. So I think that was a huge win, and that really set Coinbase on a new path, which helped deliver, a very successful recent direct listing and a foundation for the whole space. So very proud of what we all accomplished together.
It's memories of a lifetime. So you relocated from the Bay Area, and you were a huge proponent of remote first when it was unfashionable to do so. I remember this because again, it was one of those notions that I had accepted, that you have a centralized culture and everybody's in the same office. Like how has your thinking evolved, and how are you thinking about it now? And what are you learning from not kind of being in Silicon Valley anymore that we should take away from that?
Well, so I think the first thing is, people always tell me is, oh, Balaji, physical is still valuable. And I agree. But physical has now become a premium product. Back in the 90s, there was this concept of, the digital divide, right? Like that some people would be left out of the internet revolution and so on. But what's interesting is maybe the reverse is happening, where what's happening is, it's become really cheap to pack a bunch of transistors on a chip next to each other. It's become really expensive to put a lot of people in the same room. And actually that is becoming, difficult to do, right? And so the physical divide is essentially the idea that lots of people in the same space physically, like, most people don't think about this, but I just like, we weren't prepared for 10 years of Iraq. I don't think we're prepared for 10 years of COVID. And what I mean by that is we're going to need a true innovation in biomedicine, like real-time vaccines, or something more, more interesting, to really knock the thing out, as opposed to dealing with constant variants and things escaping, immune response and so on. And so my point about physical becoming a premium product is everything starts in the cloud now. You start the garage is online, right? The garage is your home desk, and the garage is a Discord, or it's a VR chat room or something, and that's cheap because the garages in the Bay Area or many places are now actually quite expensive, right? But online is still cheap. So you start online, and then now you can actually succeed online to a greater extent than you could before. And then when you raise that Series A, then maybe you decide to get an office, but physical becomes a premium product. So it's not that it goes away, it's that we just sort of flip it around. So it's still valuable, but it's something that you can do without at the beginning, unless you're doing obviously something physical like hardware or something like that, where you actually need to mess around with it. Let me pause there, get your thoughts.
Yep. No, I totally agree. I think you pioneered this whole concept of cloud first. And I
Cloud
think,
first, land last, but not land never.
yeah, yep, yep. Well, actually, so let's go to this for a second too. You had a really interesting presentation in like 2013 about exit versus voice and Silicon Valley's ultimate exit. So tell us about that, what the concept is there and why it's been so important, and like how you think your predictions panned out.
Yeah, so this talk is called Silicon Valley's Ultimate Exit. It's from Y Combinator Startup School in 2013. And I think it's held up really well. It's basically, it was a talk that was denounced by all the great and the good at the time. Or rather, I should say the West Coast tech types loved it and, gave a big cheer and so on. But it was denounced by the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, all these Brooklyn woke types did not like it very much. And fundamentally, that is because what I was essentially predicting in 2013 was what we now know as the techlash. I could see the early signs of it, just like a seed investor will see a trend and you'll invest in it. And I could see that it was going to become a really big deal. And I could also see that, essentially, when you think about technology, right? Technology in the sense of, West Coast culture, VC slash tech culture, whatever you want to call that thing that incubated in Silicon Valley and the Bay Area. It started with the birth of the transistor. You can argue, you can actually push it all the way back to like the 49ers and gold mining and kind of the culture that came in from there, right? But the thing is that it was kind of distinct from the East Coast culture in several ways. One is obviously that it was technical, mathematical, as opposed to sort of political, verbal. Two is that it was 3,000 miles away, so it's outside the social network of the DC, New York, Washington corridor. But third is actually a different group of people. It's very disproportionately immigrants. It's something like 70% immigrant, depending on how you count. And so one of the things I was also thinking about, I didn't actually mention this in the talk, but it was actually something I've been writing about more, is that, folks who are on the East Coast, and maybe working at the Times or, the Post that year it sold for just 250 million to Bezos. This was like a humiliating come down from them, while Facebook was at 100 billion, right? So the East Coast was getting humiliated, and there weren't enough spouses in the same household who were going vertical with Google and Facebook, while their companies were going flat horizontal, i.e., dying, right? So all these local news, local journalism, old media establishment folks were getting hurt economically, and they didn't have enough, let's call it portfolio diversification, because it was kind of a different people on the West Coast that were going vertical, right? All these immigrants, tech people, and so on and so forth, right? And so they didn't actually have like a stake in this, didn't have a share of the upside. And so as folks are wont to do, an ideology was constructed out of this, which, basically turned tech into this alien, evil kind of thing. And what's interesting is those accusations became, over the last 7 or 8 years, a self-fulfilling prophecy. accusing tech of surveillance capitalism, accusing them of editorial, interference, accusing them of this, accusing them of that. And so this sort of what I would consider more pure tech culture, I think has gotten corrupted over the last 8 years, and Silicon Valley actually has been turned, unfortunately, much of it into that kind of thing that they warned against. But all is not lost, because what I did call for at that time, which sounded totally, it's funny when I go back and look at it, I'm like, that sounds totally dead on in 2021. But at the time, people didn't even understand what I was saying, right? I was basically saying, right? So I was saying this gigantic hammer is coming in. Why? Because we've kicked too much butt, right? Like, there's too many different industries we're disrupting. We're Johnny-come-latelys. Old money does not like new money. Therefore, they're going to gin up something against us, bring in a huge hammer, and we're vulnerable if we're totally concentrated in one city, in one state, in one country, right? And we need to scatter. We need to do what we do best. We are, immigrants, and we're decentralized, and we're networked, and we're mobile, and we're this and we're that. Basically, every single technology has developed was putting, half our stuff was going into the cloud and half our stuff was going mobile, right? We're also building VR, and we're building crypto, and we're building remote work. So all of this stuff, we had to build it, and then we had to GTFO before that hammer came down. What's interesting is that COVID basically accelerated both things, both the kind of government control and hammer, that centralization, but also the decentralization of remote and crypto and so on. It did like 10 years in 1 year. So I think if you go back and look at that, I even like name check, in the big one, Bitcoin in there, right? Like, it's sort of my kind of offhand remarks, I think hold up reasonably well. Anyway, so that was what that talk was about.
Yeah, it's highly recommended viewing for anybody.
Oh,
I'll share the link later.
There's one other thing, actually, where there's a follow-up essay called Software is Reorganizing the World. So it wasn't just to leave Silicon Valley. It was, the fundamental issue, people talk about full stack development, right? So full stack is, front end and back end, right? And then some people say, actually, that's not really full stack. Full stack is, like software and hardware, and, like Apple's, that's truly full stack, right? And you're making silicon. And it's actually, that's not even where we need to go with full stack. Full stack means the government, right? Like, full stack is like all the way down from the laws, all the way up through like the user interface and every layer in between. Like, and, lest we think that too ambitious, that's Estonia's X-Road. That is what healthcare.gov wanted to be. That is what China has built. That is what actually India has done in some ways with India Stack. That's also what, crypto and blockchain really is. It's governance online, right? And so truly full stack means thinking, okay, how do we start actually using all of these big brains and all of these tools and all of this mobility and all this technology to start actually influencing policies in a big way, and not in the typical sense of politicking, for example, but think of it as a global market for law, right? In the sense of, you have whatever million mobile technologists, founders, entrepreneurs, investors on this side, and these policymakers on this side, mayors, governors, senators, presidents, heads of state, prime ministers, but also, influencers, academics, et cetera. And you have a two-sided marketplace of technologists and policymakers. And now you actually go from the thought of, from one country to end countries, and you have a market for law. The market for law is actually a very important market, because if one bit flips, it can literally be trillions of dollars. For example, Emily, do you know like the NSF acceptable use policy was?
No.
So that actually banned commercial traffic on the internet until 1991.
Oh, you know what? I've heard about this. Yeah.
And what they were saying was basically that, hey, look, if you let at the time, the internet was like a network for academics. People kind of know this, for academics and the military and so on. And so they said, hey, if you let commercial traffic on here, we're going to get malware and scams and porn and so on. And they were completely right.
Yep.
There were terabytes of all of that. But what there also was Google, and there was Facebook, and there was everything else, right?
Right.
And so like the internet today is like completely synonymous with .com, but we don't realize that within living memory, not even that long ago, 30 years ago, it was literally infeasible, right? So one bit flip can change everything. Go ahead.
Yeah. So on that note too, let's talk about crypto. So you've been in crypto from the beginning. How do you feel about
Satoshi is the only one who's been in it from the beginning.
Okay,
I've been pretty early, but yeah.
But how do you think we're doing it as an industry in terms of making crypto more usable to billions of people. Like, are you pleased with where we are today? There's clearly a lot more work to be done, but like, where is your head right now on crypto?
Well, so first, and and this will sound semantic, but I actually would not call us an industry. I'd call us a community. And the reason for that, here's why, is basically because, companies are sort of like rock promontories coming out from the ocean. They're assemblages of people, but we also have protocols, and we have dexes, and we have this huge community of holders and users, and so on, that's growing, right? And so, somebody observed, actually, and I RT'd them, actually a Politico writer, that you don't see, with this recent kind of infrastructure bill, whole contretemps, this journalist observed, you don't see bank customers coming out and going to bat for them the way that crypto folks are coming out for crypto, right? And that's because crypto truly does spread the wealth, right? It aligns large numbers of people. Yeah, exactly, right?
Yep.
So from one stance, look, if in 2009 you had told Satoshi that, in about 10 years, 11 years, okay, 12, you'd have a close to $2 trillion sector with every government in the world aware of it, every bank, with like, I don't know how many billionaires created, how many millionaires, how many billions of daily volume. Like, it's literally, Ethereum is bigger than PayPal, by some metrics, and Bitcoin is, like, they're both at like $1 trillion a year in terms of annual clearance, if I remember the numbers right. We're talking serious numbers for something that's about 10 years old that was basically dismissed as a toy. It's funny, I think that the narrative of this is unimportant is just about now done, and now the next 10 years is going to be the immediate flip to it's too important, right? The same with Facebook, right? It was, it was a fad, it was a bubble, it was a trinket, it was a toy. It's the end of democracy, and it's too powerful, and we need to stop it, et cetera, right? Without missing a beat, kind of the narrative kind of, went like that. Both of them were, this is bad and should be stopped, right? But one was because it be stopped because it's unimportant, the other because it's too important, right? So from those metrics standpoint, like, it's, if that was a pitch deck, you would consider that like, $1 billion is pretty good. $1 trillion, $2 trillion, that's about as good as you might expect it to get.
I have to tell a story about when we were raising our Series E and things were not looking amazing.
Oh yeah,
raising the Series E, and we kind of really wanted to be buttoned up for this guy Lee Fixel, who ultimately funded the round. He led the round, and
we made him literally billions of dollars.
I know, but I still remember we were all in the room, like, looking nice and like getting ready, and like the clock is ticking, and I'm like, oh my gosh, where's Balaji? Where's Balaji? And then he, like,
because I was giving the deck
the last minute, and he got it done, and that is Balaji in a nutshell. I love it.
Well, yeah. So I actually, the thing is, to get some exercise, I had timed the sprint from my apartment front door to the Coinbase offices. So at least I got like a daily-ish kind of sprint in. And I had about 30 seconds to spare, I think, on the budget. The only thing was, what I hadn't actually realized, I was like, I'd be sweating through the whole meeting. So Lee was like, "You're sweating bullets, man," or whatever. And I'm like, "Yeah, I just got my workout in beforehand," which is true, right? No, but it was good. Lee is actually great, and I went for a walk with him and so on a while back, and hard for him to have done better on the investment than he did, thanks to everybody's efforts, of course. So
everything worked out, and that was another special project that we worked on together.
Yes. Sean also did amazing work.
Dude,
I want to give him
Sean,
some props.
Sean crushed it and is crushing it. Okay, so actually, I'm gonna wing this one. Like, tell me, is there something since you've left Coinbase that you're especially proud of Coinbase for having shipped post you leaving that comes to mind?
A lot of things. There are a lot of things we put in motion that I was happy to see taken over the goal line. One of them was Rosetta, which Ali Fatalian and others worked on very hard, and that the abstraction layer to allow adding of assets and whatnot, and essentially reducing a lot of that complexity to individual lambdas and then exposing that was a non-trivial project, which required really understanding a lot about a lot of different chains. And so I think the engineers who worked on that did a phenomenal job. That's one thing. And I think that's helped sort of steer the whole space in a positive direction. The second is kind of the continued success of Coinbase Earn, and seeing that hit 100 mil in sales and whatnot. The goal of any Max Brandsburg did a lot of work on that deal also as well. And as mentioning to Max, like the goal of any acquisition is for people to look back on it in like 5 years and say, oh my God, that was so cheap. I can't believe they got it such a steal. This Goliath needs to be, antitrusted or whatever. This is the case they made against Facebook for Instagram, right? Where Facebook bought Instagram for $1 billion and it's worth 100 billion today. And everyone's like, oh my God, he obviously just bought the competition out. Whereas at the time, you remember what Jon Stewart said on the day that Facebook bought Instagram?
I don't remember the exact words, but it was crazy, right? It was like $1 billion. Yeah.
Exactly. He's like $1 billion. The only thing that's an Instagram that's worth $1 billion is something that instantly gets me a gram, like this, right? He said something like that. And so it was considered, because remember, like, at that time, Facebook was, I think it was actually pre-IPO. Instagram had been worth $500 million just a few days before, literally a few days, like 2 days before Zuck offered $1 billion. A bill was something like 25% of Facebook's cash on hand. Like they had $4 billion or something in cash. That's like a non-trivial amount. This is on the eve of an IPO that's already controversial because they lack, mobile revenue. It might look desperate. He only notified the board. He didn't actually, go for a board vote. Blah, blah. I mean, this was, and by the way, Instagram had zero revenue, right? So this was not, $1 billion, something with zero revenue that was worth $500 million a day before, without a board consultation, when it's 25% of your cash and you're about to IPO. That was extreme. Extreme bold. Yeah, extremely bold, right? So it's something where, just like the thing with, the narrative around Facebook, where it was a fad and a bubble. And look, there's things Facebook does. I don't agree with everything they do, but I do give them props for what they've done well. It's very hard to do what they've done.
I think the beauty of Earn is it's kind of like this weird win-win where the asset issuers love it. Coinbase generates revenue and does great from it and helps the ecosystem. And then customers love it because they get to learn about crypto. It's like, it's wonderful. It's a great revenue generator for us. And I think really importantly too, there's a legacy of the Earn folks being really great leaders in the company. You see them having stepped up and really taken on some really big initiatives at the company, the whole team that ended up staying. And so there's just a lot of great things that came out of that.
Yeah, they went through a natural selection process where only anybody who helped Earn get all the way through the kind of experience we went through is very similar to Ben with Opsware and what have you. Ben Horowitz with Opsware.
Yeah.
So I think all those folks, I'm lifelong friends with them. They did really well. One thing also about that, by the way, is that related to that, you remember those memos that I used to write? Like one of them was, asset issuers are a new kind of customer, right?
Yeah.
And essentially the point was in 2018 that Satoshi and Vitalik were not Coinbase customers, but all future coins, or let's say not all, a good chunk of future coins would be, because they're intentionally starting centralized with the aim to decentralize over time, and they want that centralized distribution, right? So what that meant is that we had to shift into thinking of ourselves as a two-sided marketplace of asset issuers and asset buyers, which is a huge shift, because now you have to have a product line for the asset issuer and an onboarding process and customer service for them, rather than just kind of stiff arming them as bad. You say, actually, they're good, and how can we do something that's win-win? And so that grew into Asset Hub, right? So, and I think there are a lot of things where we laid, and then of course USDC, going and you remember that? Like,
oh yeah,
basically I won't give all the blocking and tackling, but for several months, there were so many different debates on how to do a stable coin and so on. And eventually, after pounding the table, I was like, give me 2 engineers and a budget of X, where I won't reveal what X is, but it was actually very, very small. And I will get this done in 30 days. And we got it done in basically that time, right? Because we made the right decision to go and work with USDC rather than go and write our own smart contract, because they had already audited their thing. Jeremy, Allaire, and Circle, they had something on the shelf, but they lacked the distribution. And what we had was the distribution. We also had Mihai and Maxim, who were amazing engineers. And the biggest thing actually with that, okay, this is just like a small thing, but let's say the thing that they were the most happy about was that I ruthlessly cleared all meetings from their calendar.
Yeah.
And
Well,
go
yeah.
ahead.
No,
Anybody who wanted to meet with them for the deep work, they had to go through me first. And my answer was
yep.
just no, right? Anyway, go ahead.
And I think that's what I don't think I understood until I came into Coinbase and worked with you more deeply was that the really crypto forward engineers and product folks, they had different nuances to them that might not come from a traditional software engineer. And that's not to say one is better than the other, but for an example would be that a lot of them like to work through the night. A lot of them didn't want to have meetings. A lot of them were much more excited about being ICs than managers, and had side projects, and they just had different needs. And I think you were really great about kind of raising that with Brian and I and others, and just saying like, we need to make sure that if we're going to keep these people, that we're meeting their needs. And so that was a great learning for me.
Yeah. And yeah, it's basically, yeah, exactly. That's right. And so anyway, so USDC, I mean, I'm pretty proud of that. That's whatever $1 billion.
27 billion market cap, the largest regulated stable coin. It's kind of amazing. Yeah.
That's right. So, I mean, that's like pretty good hit list, right? That's Coinbase Earn, that's USDC, that's Asset Hub, that's, there's more than that. There were like, I don't know how many acquisitions or whatever. There's a lot of things that happened. But those are three of the big highlights. Go ahead.
Well, and generally adding assets like during your time, I think that was your hallmark too, because for those of you who don't know, we were just paralyzed, not able to launch any new assets. Balaji came in and kind of ripped up the whole thing and was like, how does the process look? Where do we rip up the old playbook and start something new? And I think one of the things actually, as you're talking, that is reminding me of kind of one of the things I think you always write like a 1-page memo. And I've trust me, I've harassed the biz ops team and corp dev teams about this because I love the way that you do this, but you'll write like a provocative statement that everybody can remember at the top title. And then you kind of, how did you learn how to get this writing across and this communication across so clearly? Because it's very unusual.
It's a good question. I mean, I don't think it was ever taught to me. Like actually, who has a good thing on this? Gosh, I'm blanking on his name. Compressed Impress. Okay, that's actually sort of the Compressed Impress. Who wrote it? Oh yeah, Eugene Wei wrote it. That's right. So Compressed Impress is what it sounds like. It itself is very meta because it is an instance of the thing he's talking about, right? Which is whatever you're doing, whatever you're explaining, if you can compact it down into the minimum number of words in a memorable phrase, and it can be, rhyming, it can be, assonance, it can be, alliteration, whatever, something that makes it memorable, then it will be remembered. And if not, then it won't, right? And moreover, and this is like a non-obvious thing, but like, how many times have you heard, just as an example, how many times have you heard the phrase, Bitcoin is digital gold?
Like a zillion.
A zillion, right? Countless. It's like in the maybe tens of thousands or whatever, right? But the thing is that there's literally billions of people who have never heard that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, it's kind of like the people who are just getting a phone today, right? There's like a billion people who are getting a smartphone today. That internet revolution has still not touched them. The thing that was completely old hat to us 15 years ago, right? And so I have to remember that onboarding is a first-class problem always. And most people who are encountering any idea, like, the blast radius of that idea, most people are on the boundary, right? This is actually like a theorem, in math. If you take the surface of, a hypersphere, right? Like a sphere in R to the N, a lot of the volume is actually there. It's not, near the center, depending on your metric. But point basically being that, you need to, I'm actually now doing the opposite of what I just said. You need to be really concise and brief. Okay, go.
So I contend that like in another life, you were like a university professor or something, because I think you're an incredible teacher. And I think that's actually your passion. So tell us a little bit about 1729. First of all, tell everybody what 1729 means actually. And then what your goal is with it.
Sure. Yeah. So, I was actually a career academic until roughly, my late 20s when I exited the cloisters of Stanford to be unleashed upon the world. Haha. But yeah, for the first almost 30 years of life, I thought that the world was just about, doing integrals. And if you could do harder integrals, then you could, build a bigger company. That was kind of, I knew nothing about business. I knew nothing about management. I really actually didn't even know that much about like software engineering. I knew computer science, but it was really like like a concept car. You know how these concept cars are up on wheels, and one thing actually, this is one of my theorems or things actually. I remember talking to Ben and Mark about this, several years ago, which was academia is like a car dealership that has all these concept cars that are up on bricks, right? And what you can go and do is smash the glass, go in there and put them on the road. And some of them are just not built for anything. They're just going to spin out, right? But some of them will be like Larry and Sergey, or like Vijay Pandey, for example, at A16Z, right? So I think academia actually does have a lot of talent. These crazy looking cars that fly all the way around, right? So that is actually something I've thought about on a global scale for a long time, which is, people have talked about one laptop per child, and that actually became people, they dismissed that in the 2000s because it didn't really work. And then it suddenly worked with the smartphone revolution, right? And just like we've got the Hubble telescope, which allows us to find the dark matter in the universe, I think with the new mobile telescope, right, with what the smartphone gives us, we can find the dark talent in the world. All these people who were left out by the 20th century, who were in, places, countries that were just missed by the economic development that basically was mostly in the US and Western Europe. And, that was, they were in communist regimes in the USSR or Eastern Europe. They were in socialist regimes in India, or fundamentalist regimes like, the Islamic Republic, of Iran or something like that, right? And these are folks who are really smart often, but just lack that opportunity. And so what I've wanted to do actually for many years is build essentially an online university that would reach out to these folks and level them up and invest in them and build them up. And, in the process of building up their human capital, you would, like figure out some way of taking a cut of that such that you could sustain the whole enterprise. There's at least a few ways of doing that. One is to invest in them, and the second way is at a skill level, if you can take them from, for example, labeling things as cat or a dog into solving JavaScript problems and then going up to higher order things, well, you boosted their hourly wage from 10 cents to $1 to $10 to $100, and you can take a percentage of that with tasks, with crypto tasks, right? So this is an idea I've been interested in for a long time and done variations on a theme, sort of like how, Evan Williams has done, he did Blogger and then he did Twitter and then he did Medium, right?
This is an evolution of Earn in some ways, right?
Yeah, exactly. So 729, it basically pulls together lots of different things from my life. It is kind of the academia aspect, obviously, like teaching a course. It is Earn and tasking. It's a social media because it's like, the tweeting and stuff is kind of part of it, which is a relatively recent, trick that I pulled up. It's the VC and the angel investing. So I'm investing in folks through a platform. So for example, go and take a look at 729.com/inflation. I haven't really like launched the site yet, because we're actually making some significant edits for like a V2, but here's like a flavor of what's up there, right? Yep. So 100K prize for a decentralized inflation dashboard, build a censorship resistant inflation dashboard, pick your project, we'll fund it with 100K. Now on this topic, by the way, why a censorship resistant dashboard, right? So one thing most people don't get, so do you know what happened in Argentina and Venezuela over the last, 10, 15 years?
Yep.
So, they had, serious, inflation, Venezuela even worse than that. So what happens is when inflation is happening, because inflation happens if people believe it's happening, that's to say, if enough people believe prices are going to rise tomorrow, then they're going to act as if it's going to happen. They'll raise prices and so on, right? So because it's like contagious in that way, a group of people start getting mad and start saying, wait a second, by talking about inflation, you're causing it, right? By publishing high prices, you're causing high prices. So that's a link between censorship and inflation, that they actually try to stop people from learning the true price of things. And so if you click those links, for example, there, like click the Argentina link. So Argentinians are now allowed to know the real rate of inflation thanks to their court. So this was, as you can see, is a court battle, right? This, if you scroll, it's like 2013, I think, 2012. 2013 from QZ, right? Overrule attempts by Argentina's government to prevent anyone who isn't the government from publishing a figure for inflation that isn't what the government says it is. Interesting, right? If you go back one, similar kind of thing. Venezuela's monthly inflation rate entered double digit territory, or perhaps not. It's hard to be sure. So point is that there is precedent for this, right? When inflation happens, governments censor. Now, when it's happening in Venezuela or Argentina, it's kind of on the boundaries of global empire, and so it's not like, it's not like that close to home base. But if it's happening in the West, well, then it's going to be a much the censorship will be much heavier. And it'll much more heavy-handed. Yeah. So this whole thing, if you scroll down, basically it goes through. This is what I like to try to do. I have a So actually, this is a great example where you just talked about a bold statement, 100K
Yep.
for an inflation dashboard. So how you might build an inflation dashboard. This is like how I might write the spec for, a PM or someone who I'm working with. Not like extremely detailed with API calls, but like, what the high level should be, obtain price data, basket of goods. And basically what I try to do is like do as much as I can myself in a day or 2 days to at least scope it out so folks aren't sometimes it doesn't work, but at least I've used some time so they know that I've got some investment in it, right?
Yep.
But anyway, so point is, so 7029 is I think one word, it's a crypto university. Okay.
Yep. And tell people really quickly, what does 72029 the number mean?
Sure. Yeah. So it is the first number that's the sum of two cubes in two different ways. It's 1 cubed plus 12 cubed and 9 cubed plus 10 cubed. And what is that number? It's basically like the E equals MC squared of India. Why? Because there's a mathematician named Srinivasan Ramanujan. It's actually from my hometown of Kumbakonam in Tamil Nadu, South India. I don't normally speak Tamil, but Tamil Puriyada, if anybody here is, on the line, whatever. So basically, in my hometown, so Ramanujan, he's not just famous there, he's famous through all of India. He's India's greatest mathematician. India's Einstein. But unlike Einstein, he also has, Einstein has a patent clerk thing, but Ramanujan came from like desperate poverty. Like he's basically like half starving in India. And he managed to get a hold of a math book that was floating around, and basically self-taught himself math, right? And pure autodidact. And he essentially wrote these physical mails, snail mails, as we'd call them today, to various mathematicians around the world, most of whom just threw them into, a circular file, throw them out. But one guy, G.H. Hardy in England, a very prominent mathematician in his own right, read them and was convinced that this guy was either a lunatic or a genius because nobody would write these formulas down. Some of them were totally obvious and very well known. Some of them were like bizarre that he'd never seen before. And others, nobody, like if they were true, you'd have to be a total genius who invented them, but they were just like alien math that had just landed from another world, right? And so he brought Ramanujan out to England, and then Ramanujan began a rampage through pure math. And it's actually funny, Hardy thought that the stuff that they were working on would never be applied, but a lot of what they worked on was number theory, which involves, it's the theory of integers and especially theory of primes, and that actually, number theory in the broad underpins cryptography, which underpins Bitcoin, which is why we have the laser eyes, right? And so how do we get to 7029? Well, basically, Ramanujan on his deathbed, he died very young. Hardy was coming in to try to cheer him up. And he said, oh, this taxi that I just came in on, the license plate is very boring. It's got the number 1729. And he said, no, it's his first number, the sum of two cubes in two different ways, because he's on a first name basis with every number, right? So what does that symbolize to me? That symbolizes a few things, right? First is, Ramanujan himself was this incredible talent that benefited the whole world that almost starved to death in India. And it was just because he had that connection to the outside world that he could level up and show his greatness, right? And how many more are there like that, right? Number one. Number two is there's also kind of the fact that I think it is now time to start building, in the same way that there's tech brands, like we take this for granted, but Google starts in the US, but it becomes an international brand. Facebook starts in the US, becomes an international brand, right? You can sort of distinguish hot dogs and football as very distinctly American things from these global products that have American origin, right? In the same way that, in China, you could distinguish, red envelopes or mooncakes, which are very Chinese culture, from a chair that you sit on that's manufactured in China that happens to be Chinese, right? That's a different, the global product versus the local product, right? And so one of the things I've been interested in is having global products arise from the rest of the world, especially India, which is actually number 3 in unicorns. And so 79 is sort of both an international brand and an Indian brand at the same time, because mathematics is global, but it's also 79 in particular is Indian. And I think a lot of the talent will come from India. And third is it's number theory, right? And that underpins crypto. It's kind of got a little angle on that. And fourth, it's a great name for like a crypto university. Yeah, so it puts all the pieces together. Anyway.
Yep. It's so you to think of all of that to make that the brand. I love that. Okay. I could literally go on with you for hours, and that's part of what I loved about working with you. But let me do rapid fire, and don't think when I ask you these, don't even think about them. Just respond with the first thing.
Go ahead.
Most exciting new crypto project.
Decentralized media, which is like Mirror, BitClout, Capsule Social, Farcaster, what Dan is working on, and those kinds of things. I think it's going to be digital gold, decentralized finance, decentralized media. Those are the 3 eras of crypto. Not that the other 2 go away; they keep compounding. But decentralized media is the next 5 years.
So decentralized media is the next theme for you in crypto over the next 5 years.
Absolutely, and what that means is open backends, right? Social networks where you can print out every post, you can print out the social graph, you can search index the social graph, you can mass message people, you can do end-to-end encrypted messaging, all the type of stuff, and you replace passwords and usernames and passwords with public and private key pairs. Basically, the architecture of a BitClout or a Mirror or a Farcaster or a Capsule or these new networks.
Most exciting future use case for NFTs.
There's a lot of them, but I'm particularly interested in domain name and username markets, because I think those have so ENS, but then also I think the next generation of decentralized media will have tradable usernames. And I think that'll be actually a big thing where, frankly, that might turn out to finance, the next generation of social networks, just taking a cut on username sales. I don't know how much that would be if Twitter actually allowed that, but it would be pretty big. I don't know if you'd have to work out the math. It might be surprisingly large how much people would pay for great usernames.
Favorite person to follow on Twitter?
Well, I hate Twitter actually in some ways. I mean, I have a love-hate relationship with Twitter because it's like a library mixed with Liberia. That's to say, Liberia, great country, but in this unfortunate civil war for a long time. And so, that's what Twitter's like. It's like an academic discussion mixed with a civil war where you're trying to have a conversation with someone and some guy, comes in, blasting at you. So who's my favorite person to follow on Twitter? What I do like are the strange accounts. They're not strange accounts. I say the accounts that teach me something interesting. I followed Strange Borders the other day, which is actually kind of cool. And it shows, like the border between the Dominican Republic and Haiti, where it's like deforested on one side and green on the other, right? Or, a border where there's like 3 different countries in one spot, that kind of stuff, like cool stuff that you wouldn't figure out otherwise. That's what I like. Yeah.
How long will it take to establish the first cloud nation?
I actually think we will get startup cities this decade and cloud countries by the middle or the end of the 2030s. I think it'll happen faster than people think. Because you think about Bitcoin, it took 10 years to get to where it is, which is actually not that long, right? In the grand scheme of things. Ethereum was only 5 or 6 to get to where it's gotten. And so, a lot of things happen faster at internet speed. So the question is, how quickly can you build up an international brand in a sense of nationalism and community? You can do that pretty fast nowadays, at least the size. Whether you can get the affinity is a different thing. But I mean, a cloud city, like depending on how you define it, 10,000 people, 100,000 people, I think that'll happen by the 2030s. The basic thing is, if you think about what happened with crypto, it had both these absolute numerical things that were market driven, like just the price of Bitcoin. And then it also had sort of the social markers of acceptance, like, this, the first venture round in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is listed on Bloomberg. Bitcoin is mentioned by the celebrity and so on, right? All of those were markers along the way, right? And it's funny, now we don't even think of that being a big deal. Of course, the celebrity mentioned, but in the early days, I remember there was a time where I had every single paper an article ever written about Bitcoin on my hard drive, because I printed them all out. Dan Benet used to maintain this. So in the same way, that was how you got the emergence of a cryptocurrency. You had an absolute thing that you could drive, in good weather or bad, and then the relative things would kind of come in, the social metrics would come in. So the absolute thing that we can drive for the cloud country is the size of the population, and also other metrics like the real estate or the GDP of the crypto economy. And then you get these metrics like, first mentioned by a celebrity, and first acknowledgement by a politician, and so on and so forth, until eventually you get that first international recognition, right? And the thing is, as you go through in this article, like, most people don't realize this, but here's a question. Like, so what percentage of countries do you think have less than 10 million people?
Man, I have no idea. 10%.
See, a lot of people think that because we all live in big countries, right? We live in,
I'm sure.
right?
Yeah, I'm sure it's like more like 90%.
Yeah, so it's interesting. It's something, depending on how you count, it's on the order of, I think, 30% are less than 1 million in size, and 60% less than 10 million.
Yep.
Right. So those are actually small for social networks, right?
Yeah.
Relative,
Yeah,
right?
it's not a huge hurdle.
In terms of number of people, it's not a huge hurdle. The fundamental question is, can you get strength of affiliation?
Yeah.
Right. And so, to have Luxembourg in the cloud is not necessarily that crazy. To have 1 million people-ish in Estonia, or Luxembourg, where they have a sense of identity in the cloud, is not actually that crazy an idea. And the critical thing, when I talk about how to start a new country, see at the top, you see those 7 methods, right? The first 3 are the obvious, like election, revolution, and war. We'll call it the fiat methods, right? And those work, but they're problematic in different ways. They're all conflict. They're all conflict with other human beings, right? Micronations, sea-sitting in space, are kind of fanciful things that depend upon things that don't work. But the cloud country is like the 7th approach, where we're basically just building a large enough group up in the cloud that can crowdfund territory on Earth. And here's an important thing, by the way, a very important thing. The territory on Earth can just be a fractal combination of different cul-de-sacs and ranches and apartment buildings and individual rooms all around the world. Like, here's one way of putting it. You're not in San Francisco anymore, but remember when we stood at One Front Street, we'd look out the window, right? You could see all of these windows in San Francisco, right? And you've probably seen these panoramas of New York City or something like that, and with all these windows, okay? So here's a question. If you were to light up the flag of Facebook in every window where someone used Facebook, how many windows would light up, right? If you looked at a panorama of New York City and you asked, okay, behind this window, is there a Google user? Is there a Facebook?
Of course, yes, of course.
Right.
It's everyone.
So here's the thing. It's everyone. However, when Google and Facebook rose, it wasn't as if a flag was unfurled in front of each window, marking their control of territory.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's a different thing. It creeps
it's a different
up
thing.
on you. Yeah.
Right. That's right. But had that happened, it would have been a very different perception of what the internet was, both for good and bad, right? For bad, it would have aroused backlash. For good, it would mean like, whoa, this thing is growing fast. Wow, this is way more. Like 1 year, nobody would have, you may have seen a flag or two, and then like 2 years later, every single window would have had a flag, right?
Yeah.
And so the thing is that, when I talk about a cloud country, I'm talking about a fractal state. And this is a little bit of a deep point, but basically, most people don't know this, but the ocean was like the first peer-to-peer network, right? Why was it so critical to have a port? Why did Portugal, want a port? Why was it great that it had ports? Because it could just send stuff directly to Brazil and to Macau, and it didn't have to go like overland through Russia and so on, right? So it was basically, it could just send packets peer-to-peer, so to speak, And so that's why the culture of maritime countries developed differently than the culture of landlocked countries, okay? So Germany's culture versus England's culture is very different. And so the thing is that, when we go and look at the map of, let's say, a country like Indonesia, we don't realize this, but we're actually projecting an abstraction on it. Indonesia is an archipelago. There's all these individual islands. They're separated by the ocean, but we think of them as a country. Now, imagine that you have all those individual islands as pockets of land around the world, and they're separated by the internet, but they're networked together, and they think of themselves as a country. They're putting that flag out the window conceptually, or at least having it up in their room, right? They have declared themselves, they have LARPed themselves a citizen of this New Republic, right? And you know what? Like at first, that's the larpiest thing in the world, right? Live action role playing, it's Dungeons and Dragon stuff. And that's awesome. Okay. Because you want people to essentially not take it seriously. They think it's a joke. That's fine. Right. And that gives you kind of room to build. And so you build and you build. And eventually what happens is, you have 5 people who are individually in apartments in New York City and, like Boston or whatever, and they get together in your online community and they crowdfund a cul-de-sac, right? Now you've got a little corner with 5 houses that all, live in each other. And it's almost like water droplets, like assembling. You have all these little pockets around the world. Now we actually have a precedent for this. You know what that precedent is? There's several
What?
precedents. One of them is just tech companies, right? If you think about Google,
Right.
Google has little offices all around the world, right?
Right.
But those are corporate HQs, However, when you go and open Bing your card, you're stepping into a little slice of Google. It's Google branded everywhere, right? You're on the Google network. You're a citizen of Google. You're within kind of the Google, envelope everywhere, right? But that's just for corporate real estate, commercial real estate. You could apply the same concept to residential real estate, and you have the Century 9 passport that opens the door. And this is what I mean by the first network state, where basically all these people are conceptualizing themselves as citizens of a new kind of state. And they don't need permission from anybody else. They just need peer-to-peer permission from each other to treat each other like citizens. So physical levels of civility, for example, are one concept there, right? And the thing about this, which is interesting, is obviously crypto is very important because it gives them sovereignty. It gives them sovereign communications. It gives them sovereign currency. They can crowdfund things. They have money that others can't take because, like, of course, they have to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, obey the laws of whatever country they're in. But like an outright robbery of the community is difficult to do because, this is stronger, right? It's in the cloud. And when you start thinking about where you can go with that, you can go very, very, very far. For example, we can do crowdfunded software development in VR of what our first cities will look like. And we literally build them in VR. And with Autodesk and AutoCAD, we can actually make it something where we're building them to spec. We're building them to effectively be printed out, right? And so you actually start doing something where you do the maximum you can on the computer, and then you get real estate developers and construction guys to look at that and be like, okay, that is $100,000 to materialize this VR building into the physical world. Remember the scene from Fight Club, famous scene where all the IKEA things have price tags on them, right? So imagine you look around this VR city that we've built, and you're like, okay, it's 100K to materialize that building, and 50K for that, and 20. Okay, so it's $20 million to materialize the city. Done. Okay, and you get a quote from one of these prefab people who can snap the whole thing together, or maybe it's less than that. And one of the things that's really phenomenal about this is you can take that VR environment, and because it's all digital, you put on your AR glasses and you can actually see it in the desert. You can visit beforehand. And because you built it virtually, you can bid all of these developers against each other. And often it's like a 10x difference. A real estate developer in Arizona will quote you a totally different price than somebody in Minnesota or somebody in, Ukraine or something like that. And of course, you're taking jurisdiction and other things into account, right? But the wide open lands of, especially the American West are pretty interesting here because, they're going to have satellite internet from Starlink, right? All of this empty terrain, we can now like sort of resettle the map in a different way. So this is all crazy. Go ahead.
No, I'm recalling a recent conversation we had where like you were basically like, I'm all in on AR VR, and now it's starting to kind of fit together how you're seeing the different pieces of the puzzle fit together.
That's right. That's right. Like essentially, it's something where when you look at what technology is doing holistically, it is with mobile and with VR and with cloud and remote and with crypto, we're cutting all the obligate ties to the land, right? First, your books get virtualized with Kindle, and now your food with Instacart, and your car with Uber, and your physical mail, and your this, and now your wallet and your keys. All this stuff just gets digitized up into the cloud and on your phone. And so you can move around, or you can put on the VR headset and be in a completely different world, or you can be in AR and you can be in a different world while among other people. And so the ability to opt in to networks of other folks where you can literally just create your own reality or your virtual reality and then make it physical reality, that is increasing, right? And so that's the kind of stuff I think about a lot. And then the other thing I think about is what's the next step after that? So basically, with the crypto university, we start with teaching crypto, of course, and then you can teach the computer science that buttresses crypto, right? Everything that you need to know digital signatures and hash functions, and of course, big O notation, and like you can basically do a full computer science education because blockchains are like browsers or operating systems. They are just very, very sophisticated pieces of software that include, in the fullness of everything, they have a compiler and they have a programming language. Obviously, they've got a database and they've got a networking protocol, and they've got an API that you can write stuff with, and they'll sometimes have formal verification nowadays, and blah blah. You can throw a bunch of computer science stuff at it, right? If you take block explorers, you have search, right? So you essentially can use crypto to teach all of computer science, right? And and then you can go from there and you can basically say, well, to actually physically materialize a city, eventually you're going to need the physical engineering disciplines, which are, chemical engineering and electrical engineering and civil engineering and mechanical engineering and so on, right? So you start teaching those. And so in this fashion, you kind of have, how the land grant universities grew in the 1800s, right? They're focused on the practical problems of developing the land and teaching people how to farm and till and, make the, desert or the hills bloom. And so we kind of go back to that future. And one thing I do think about is a lot of these crypto fortunes, if we're going back to the future, well, Leland Stanford endowed Stanford, right? And so this is a great way to turn some of that, those funds into free online education for everybody, right? And so this is how I'm thinking about it. Like the crypto university is sort of related to bootstrapping the city and so on. It's kind of crazy thing that maybe only I would do, but we'll see if it works. So that's what I'm working on.
I love that. We got to do this again. Balaji Srinivasan, thank you for making the time and for doing so much for Coinbase. Just true pleasure. Thank you.